Hi, class. So today we're going to do chapter 22. This is a pretty long chapter, so there'll probably be a few parts to it. And I do apologize. I'm not feeling so great. I'm a little stuffed up and I have a sore throat, so bear with me if my voice is not as strong as usual. So anyway, we're doing chapter 22, fats and oils. So fats and oils referred to as fats from this point on, we'll just call them fats, contribute to the following: flavor, color, texture, and mouthfeel. The first fat was from an animal carcass. Domestication of animals provided butter, which became a major source of fat by making butter from the cream that rose to the surface of milk. We'll talk about butter a little bit further in the PowerPoint. And then eventually, after butter, then oils were extracted from plants and seeds. So then technology enabled development of new fats from old sources, such as margarine. Again, we'll talk about this later on. Which was used for food preparation and not, or fats and oils are used for food preparation and as an ingredient. So manufacturers of food can add fat to improve production, handling, storage, and stability. They can be used in the formulation of foods, and they can be added directly to a finished food, such as butter on toast or butter in mashed potatoes. As you guys know, excess of fat and health implications has led to creations of fat replacers, which we'll talk about later. So this is what's really important, the functions of fat in food. This is what you really need to know. So there's unique properties of fat. So the chemical configuration of a fat molecule is very unique, and it can be hard to find other ingredients to substitute for it. The length and degree of saturation of the three fatty acids on the glycerol molecule of a triglyceride can be hard to duplicate using other healthier foods. In your advanced food science class, you'll do a lab where you substitute different fats, and you'll see how the other things that are substituted for fat maybe don't give quite the same texture and flavor and all around consistency. So, some functions of fats in foods. So, heat transfer is specific to fats. Fat's a medium that transfers heat to foods without burning them. The amount of fat needed to prepare foods varies. So, you can have a small amount of fat, like when you're sauteing, a moderate, which you would do when you're pan frying, or a large, such as deep frying. So, in all these cases, the fat helps to transfer the heat to the food. If you've ever read a recipe that calls for some oil in the pan before you start adding your ingredients and you want that oil to heat up, it's because that oil is going to help transfer some of that heat. So fats also have shortening power. Highly saturated fats, specifically, such as animal fats, including butter and lard, have more shortening power. And shortening power means that fats interfere with the gluten development and shorten strands of gluten, preventing them from joining together and creating a more tender baked good. So you'll notice that, like a challah bread, for instance, that has some fat in it, will have a more delicate bite to it than, say, a baguette that's a little bit more chewy. And that's due to the fat and the shortening power of the fat. So solid fats are typically our saturated fats, and they're ideal for baked goods when flakiness is desired, like biscuits, scones, and pie crusts. So here's the functions of fats in foods. So heat transfer, we just already talked about, and shortening power. We're going to talk about emulsions, and I'm also going to share an emulsion video for you guys. Varying melting points. We'll talk about plasticity and solubility. Also, we've already talked about flavor and mouthfeel, as fat is now considered a flavor, and then it also provides a definite mouthfeel. If you've ever had a piece of chocolate in your mouth, you know exactly what we're talking about here. Textures, fat adds to creaminess, flakiness, tenderness, elasticity, ease of cutting, and viscosity. It can add to the appearance with a sheen, oiliness, or color. If you've ever made an olive oil cake before, you'll notice that it definitely has that color that olive oil has, that like greenish tint to it. Fats are great for satiety. I wrote on some of your menu planning projects to include a little bit of fat and protein at breakfast because it's really important. Protein helps you feel full longer, but fats help you feel full. So, really important is satiety. A lot of people on low fat diets tend to overeat carbohydrates because they're trying to make up for the fact that they're not feeling full. And then nutrients. Fat provides 9 calories per gram, and it helps carry fat soluble vitamins. So just remember carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram and proteins 4 calories per gram. So fat is a larger molecule and takes much more time to break down in the body, thus why it provides way more energy. So some other functions of fats and foods, fats are what are used for deep frying. So deep frying is when you want to cook foods quickly, and oil is absorbed and water leaves as steam, which contributes to a crisp, moist texture. So you can see from this picture that the food absorbs the oil, and then water evaporates out of the food, which gives an outer crust on the surface. I think we'll talk about this a little later in the chapter, but it's really important to have the right oil and the right temperature because if not, too much oil will be absorbed and then you have like a really greasy product and also way too much then your excess fat in the diet. I mean, fried foods are already going to provide that. So emulsions. I love talking about emulsions. I talk about them in my teen cooking class as well because we do a really cool salad dressing lesson where the kids get to make their own salad dressing from whatever ingredients that they want. It's really fun. But so a salad dressing is an emulsion. An emulsion is defined as a liquid dispersed in another liquid with which it usually is incapable of being mixed. So you've all probably heard the expression oil and water don't mix. This is what we're talking about. Typically one of the liquids is a water-based liquid. So this could be vinegar, lemon juice, any other citrus juice. And then the other liquid is usually a fat-based. So we're talking about olive oil. Water and fat-based liquids have a natural surface tension that keeps them apart from each other. And also we know that fat is not soluble in water, so it's not going to dissolve. So that's two of the reasons that if you've ever made a salad dressing before, without creating an emulsion, your oil will separate from your vinegar. So there are 2 different types of emulsions. There's an oil and water emulsion, and this is when oil droplets are dispersed throughout the water. This is what most emulsions are. So this is going to be your salad dressings. Milk is actually a oil and water emulsion because milk has a lot of water in it and some fat, right? So the fat is evenly distributed throughout the water. That's why we homogenize milk, if you remember back to our milk chapter. And cream, egg yolks are actually an oil and water emulsion. Mayonnaise, cheese sauce, gravies, puddings, and cream soups. So a water and oil emulsion is when water droplets are dispersed throughout the oil. So this is what happens in butter and margarine and most cake batters. So we'll talk a little bit more about how water and butter is an important thing a little later in the slideshow. So here are your emulsions. So there are 3 parts to an emulsion. There's the dispersed or discontinuous phase, which is usually your oil. And then a dispersed or continuous phase, most likely your water-based. And then you can add an emulsifier. And so this is a stabilizer that keeps one phase dispersed in the other. The surface tension is reduced between the 2 liquids, allowing them to come together and blend. So you can see here, this is what salad dressing looks like if you have not properly made an emulsion, and this is what it would look like if you did. You can see your oil is evenly dispersed through your water medium, and we'll talk about how emulsifiers work in just a second. So emulsifiers work by lowering the surface tension between water and fat, fat-based liquids, increasing the blending ability. So they act as a surfactant. I like to say that emulsifiers work by it like binding two ingredients that normally would dislike each other. So hydrophilic ingredients, those are your water-loving ingredients. That's going to be your let's say if we're making a salad dressing, that's going to be your vinegar. And then your hydrophobic or your water-fearing ingredients. And that's going to be your oil. Because as we know, oil is not soluble in water. And so the emulsifier acts as a bridge between the oil and the water. And if you guys remember from your anatomy classes, cell membranes are made up of our hydrophilic and hydrophobic ends. So that's exactly what we're showing here. You can't see me pointing to the screen. That's exactly what we're showing here. So a emulsifying agent has both so that it can help bind the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic molecules. So there's different types of emulsifiers. So you can have mono and diglycerides, which are most commonly used to increase emulsion stability, dough strength, volume, texture, and tolerance of ingredients to processing. You can also use phospholipids, such as lecithin from egg yolks. So if you've ever made Caesar salad dressing, it usually calls for egg yolks. Then you can use milk protein, soy protein, gelatin, gluten, vegetable gums, ground paprika, dried mustard. I use in my salad dressing like a Dijon mustard typically. I think it adds a really nice flavor and it has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties. And then you can also add ground herbs and spices that may help to emulsify. And so the way that some of these work is because they have hydrophobic and hydrophilic properties, but other of these just actually create a thickness for the emulsification, and that will not create as stable of an emulsion, which we'll talk about in a second. Honey also works. Oops, I went the wrong way. So here you can see without an emulsifier, the fat molecules all bind together, and that's why they float on the top of the surface. With an emulsifier, they're so much more evenly dispersed. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. So stability of emulsions. So you can have a temporary emulsion. This is typically your oil and vinegar salad dressings. They're least viscous and stable, and they separate out when they're left alone without an emulsifying agent. You also want to add agitation. That's going to help create an emulsion. So if you've seen a recipe for a salad dressing, it'll tell you to slowly whisk in your oil while whisking. So slowly whisk in your oil, because if you're agitating, you're going to help combine the two. So that'll work, but then it'll separate eventually. Like if you put it in your refrigerator or let it sit. If you put an emulsifying agent in there, it won't separate. Semi-permanent, these are going to be like French and Italian dressing. These have intermediate viscosity and a tendency to separate if the stabilizers in them are decreased. And then there's a permanent emulsion. This is going to be mayonnaise. So mayonnaise is usually made from vegetable or olive oil, egg yolk, vinegar, or lemon juice. And so the egg yolk in this situation acts as a emulsifying agent. And because you actually have to, like the way in which you make mayonnaise creates a permanent emulsion. Obviously, because we can keep mayonnaise in our refrigerators and they never separate. It never separates. So another function of fats and foods is its melting point. So fats melt at different temperatures, and the melting point is dependent on the fatty acid's characteristics. So this includes its degree of saturation. Unsaturated fats tend to be liquid at room temperature. The length of the carbon and hydrogen tail. So the shorter the length, the lower the melting point, and the longer the length, the more energy it will take to break the bonds and melt the fat, which makes sense, right? Cis or transfiguration. So you guys know that how the molecule is shaped, whether or not all the double bonds are pointing the same way or opposite ways. Transfiguration has a higher melting point. And then the crystalline structure. And that's how fatty acids are packed on the triglyceride molecule, which you talk a lot about in advanced food science.